our first presentation with Anna Lee, a wonderful, passionate environmental educator, conservationist, aquatic biologist, and outdoor recreationist. She has spent the past few years in California, Oregon, Wyoming, Montana, and Colorado, working in freshwater and saltwater ecosystems, exploring public lands, engaging with local communities, and educating K through 12 students about conservation efforts in the outdoors. And Anna, after you sent me this bio, I think that a huge accomplishment of Anna's is she is now on the board of Montana Wild, I believe. And what a beautiful accomplishment for you. Anna currently works as an educator in Yellowstone National Park, where she interacts with hundreds of individuals a day to educate about wildlife conservation. And I'll go ahead and pass it on over to you for your presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rosie. And hello, everyone. I am more of the interactive person, so if there's any chance for me to actually interact with any of you all tuned in today with the conference, go ahead and maybe send me an exclamation mark in the chat so I can actually see everyone and what they're up to. So before I go ahead and get started with this conference, again, Rosie, thank you so much for inviting me to the Speak for the Wolves conference. I'm sure everyone is having so much fun here and listening in with the panel discussions. I do want to acknowledge the land that I'm currently on, the Blackfeet, Cayuse, Coeur d'Alene, Shoshone, and Nez Perce, also known as Yellowstone National Park. I am currently overlooking the entire national park right now. So today I will be coming to you as an educator that has been here since April, working as an educator here, taking folks out to watch wolves and grizzly bears and also Old Faithful and all the other places as well. But like Rosie said, I am officially on the Montana Wildlife Federation board member. So awesome. Thank you so much, Rosie, for shouting that out. Incredibly excited to help serve alongside other amazing biologists and community members and also commissioners in the state of Montana to hopefully protect some of the wildlife in conservation as well. And so I'm gonna go ahead and get started on my presentation today. Again, thank you, Rosie, and everyone else for the invitation to join your space today. So today's topic is about how wildlife watching and also education will actually help wildlife in the long run. It kind of sounds as simple as that, but you know, I am going to come from it from a BIPOC perspective and also from other community members that not necessarily would be able to come out here. So for those of you who are, you know, joined in for this meeting right now, Rosie, is it true that they can interact with me right now?
Amanda, can you speak more to that?
Yes, they should be able to message you as a co-host. They have to choose you from the drop-down menu.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So everyone go ahead and choose me on that drop-down menu if you're interacting with this panel right now, just because I love to hear from you all. But while you're messaging me privately, go ahead and, you know, give me an exclamation point if you have ever seen wolves in the wild before. Either it's in Yellowstone or anywhere else that you traveled around the world, either it's Alaska, if you've ever seen wolves in person. So I'm gonna go ahead and wait on those answers. Oh, awesome. So I'm already getting some replies right now too. Okay, not in the wild, works with captive breath. Perfect. So thank you for those of you who actually told me they're captive or either in the zoos too. So that would also count. So either in the wild or in a zoo in a captive setting. Have you ever seen wolves before? Perfect. Wolves in Yellowstone. Awesome. So believe it or not, you know, because this is Speak for the Wolves, a lot of you may have never seen the wolves in person before. My first time actually seeing the wolves themselves were actually in October of last year. And right now, this year is my fourth time in Yellowstone National Park. So what I do every single day as an educator, I actually take out, you know, a few dozen individuals to actually see their first wolves. Either they're coming from like New York City, Chicago, international, or even to other states. And for a lot of folks, it is an incredible experience for them. Whether, you know, I'm having kids seeing them for the first time at like the San Diego Zoo or the Colorado, the conservation center that they have there for wolves too. So there are a lot of opportunities to see wolves themselves, but primarily when it's out in the wild, it's truly something of extraordinary just because you actually get to see wolves interacting with their habitat. And Lamar Valley in Yellowstone National Park is one of the first places that actually got the restoration back to the ecosystem. So talking about the 1995-1996 wolf restoration. So I'm incredibly honored and privileged to even have this place as a work experience, being able to talk about the historical context too, right? So when Rosie, started off this conference with the land acknowledgement and acknowledging, colonialization and what that did with wildlife conservation, I do want to jump back into that as well. So this topic today is how, wildlife watching and education can actually transform public behavior to make better wildlife management decision. So overall, when you're out there and seeing something, it all goes back to being educated, actually seeing stuff that you care about. So you can actually go home and be better stewards of the land, water, air, and wildlife as well. So I love how a few of you actually acknowledge zoos in a captive setting. And then there's also the wildlife tourism side. So some of you may have, come out to Yellowstone in your own vehicle and got to see some wildlife as well. Or you've actually taken some wildlife tour guides to actually show you around to these settings and show you your first wolf in a massive telescope. So with that, I do want to acknowledge that with education, it also leads to rises in conservation concerns because it goes back to the individual truly understanding why it's really important for these wolves to be here and other apex predators to be in the environment, right? It also enhances wildlife management and other opportunities and increases funding for research. Maybe, within the past 4 years, I'm not sure what everyone's political affiliation is, but regardless, science is still around. And so it also increases research and funding opportunities, right? Because, if folks are truly caring and very outspoken and holding their politicians and holding, legislation accountable within their own state and then within a national setting, the government and federal agencies will fund more and actually allocate money to some of those conservation efforts, but also lead to, biologists being out there, educators doing their work, and also having more of an insight of what's actually truly going on there. And then another thing is education also leads to enhancement of public and political support as well as funding. So it also increases pressure from community members and also, just like the average Joe and Susan and Sarah to actually put pressure on their politicians to support wildlife conservation. So one of the things I oftentimes get when individuals come out here to visit Yellowstone for the first time is, what can I now go home back to New York City or Chicago or my small town in Kansas and actually help out the wolves, right? Because a lot of people, I didn't know until I went to college and got my degree in fish and wildlife biology that I actually truly understand the coexistence between these apex predators and also in the environment, right? So when you're not in this environment, you're not truly seeing these wildlife in your backyard. And for the first time ever, you're being educated of, how to coexist and bring back the reciprocity with the environment. You go back home, you feel empowered to do something. So it's been incredibly fulfilling to actually see some of my individuals that I had to go out and educate, go back home and feel very empowered to actually, do something about it. So with that being said, when you're watching from home, wherever you're located right now, I hope you feel empowered after the Speak for the Wolves conference and further along the road to, speak up and raise some hell. So with education and, not only can you help educate folks about why, wolf restoration or wolves even being in the environment and wolf management and coexisting with humans is incredibly important, but it also allows people to gain that knowledge and continue forth with any of the, either it's political lobbying, legislation, voting as well. I believe Rosie, when her and I talked, she worked on Proposition 114 in Colorado to help restore some of the wolves there. And, a few weeks ago, I get this update from Colorado Fish and Wildlife of there's a wolf pack finally, established in the state of Colorado. So it's incredibly, heartwarming and also beautiful to hear that there are so many people just like Rosie and others that put on this Speak for the Wolves conference and other panelists too that are working behind the scenes with this. But that doesn't mean that you at home don't have a voice and an opportunity to do something as well. It can also lead to voluntary personal donations to nonprofit and for-profit organizations, as well as wildlife conservation-focused organizations as well. So what that means is that, when people are feeling empowered, if they have the means or the funds to, they will donate back, whether it's to like defenders of wildlife, other nonprofits that work primarily towards wolf restoration or wolf advocacy as well. So, if you're more on the shy person, like I am on the spectrum, but you have, at least $5 a month to donate, like that means a lot to people, especially if they're coming from affluent backgrounds or affluent families in larger cities as well. And then wildlife tourism, which is more of the social economic side to things, specifically those focused on apex predators, such as the wolves and the bears, can actually influence engagement in conservation-based behaviors. So that means is that, you probably heard that science is a truly important thing for wildlife-based management, but with that coming with conservation-based management and folks actually, saying their voices and actually voting upon the matters that, will make an impact on the environment, such as, wolf restoration. There is a huge part of it that is more of the human side, more of the social side and the economy side to things too. So, everything that I've just talked about ties back to education as well. Yeah, and then Rosie just did write in the comments, if you have a question for me, go ahead and put it in the comment section. Oh, and also Stephanie just said, wild wolves in Yellowstone, I saw the Wapiti pack 5 days ago. Welcome. Cool. So yeah, going back to the whole education side, I love interacting with people. So if you want to share more about your wolf watching experience or maybe where you're visiting from or tuned in from too, that would be awesome for me to hear about. And so going back to, the education side to things, first and foremost, education is incredibly important because it goes back and, feeds people and inspires people and empowers them to make a difference and go back to voting, go back to raising hell about these things, whether they're coming from a larger city or a small town or a rural area, or even internationally too, just actually understanding what's going on out there. But there are some huge disadvantages to, the wildlife tourism and actually being able to watch wolves. From firsthand experience, because I'm taking folks and individuals out in Yellowstone National Park that are coming more from an affluent family, particularly a demographic that's mostly Caucasian. It's really, I guess, more of a disadvantage and kind of polarized on who's able to actually care about the wolves and who's actually having this opportunity, the accessibility to go wolf watching as well. So a lot of the times with these like socioeconomic disadvantages, primarily the BIPOC community, BIPOC stands for Black, Indigenous, People of Color communities, would have more of a disadvantage or kind of more adversities and barriers to kind of cross over to be able to interact with wildlife tourism and be educated on these subject matters. So some of the things that are a huge barrier to BIPOC communities and also low income communities coming from, inner city suburban areas are affordability and access. For those of you who have traveled to Yellowstone National Park and maybe even Alaska to watch the wolves, you would probably understand how costly it could be, whether it's transportation with, airplane tickets, car rentals, lodging, whether it's in a hotel, motel, camping setting, and also just, finding the time to, right? I'm sure, last year we were able to work from home for most of us, but on a normal year, you're most likely working 40, 50 hours a week, only having 2 weekends off, maybe like 6 days out of the year, a paid vacation that doesn't necessarily overlap with any friends or family. So with that affordability and access, it's incredibly difficult for a lot of communities to actually be out here and see the wolves firsthand and actually be educated on, the interaction with the environment. Another thing is cultural background. So the lack of diversity can be another huge factor that would be particularly scary and also kind of uncomfortable for a lot of folks to be out here. I identify as an Asian American woman. That is my background. I'm second generation. So for me to be in Montana, Wyoming, the Colorado area, it does take a lot of guts and also a lot of just being comfortable in your own skin too. but I'm also privileged in the fact that I've, worked in this area. I know my way around it, but there are some days where I do feel, very uncomfortable to take the clients that I do take out or interact with some of the public out there, due to like hostility or just kind of like microaggression. So, just as coming from my personal experience and background, but, for a lot of folks, that is part of, as sad as it sounds, it is part of their day-to-day livelihood. And just keeping that in mind is like in a public setting, the public lands are for everyone to use, but there are a lot of instances that a lot of communities, especially BIPOC communities, that do not feel comfortable here at all. Discrimination in white spaces, going back to the whole, lack of diversities and these natural areas, not having that safe space can be a huge burden for people and families to come visit, especially if they don't feel safe doing so or feel safe and vulnerable to ask these questions in the first place. And you'll oftentimes see that out here, there are certain folks that, will want to ask questions and interact. And there are certain people who are like a little too timid to reach out and ask these questions as well. And then another thing is historical trauma and concerns of safety. So I really appreciate that Rosie and others actually opened up this conference with a land acknowledgement and acknowledging that a lot of the all the public places were due to colonialization and genocide and removal of Native and Indigenous communities. So because I work in a national park, the National Park Service system still has yet to acknowledge kind of that barrier and kind of that historical trauma that has been inflicted in so many communities. So without all of those acknowledgement and the social disadvantages and economic sides of things too, there is a huge community out there that is completely left out of the equation. So now, when we're talking about education and going it back to wildlife-based conservation, and then also enhancement of wildlife management and research, you're completely leaving out a broader community that should be incorporated into these voices, into these management plans as well. With that being said, my call to action to you all is be the person to hold some of these agencies accountable, to acknowledge some of the historical trauma that they inflicted on the community members. Another thing is actually holding people accountable and asking these really tough questions to either its private organizations that are monetizing, commercializing wildlife tourism, of like, where is that funding going to? Is it go back to conservation, or does it pretty much just go back to your salary? Because a lot of times, this land is for everyone to use, but what makes it different from, the average Sarah to go out there in her own like little sedan and then paying over $900 for an 8-hour tour a day? So those differences and kind of like the accessibility too for a lot of families is completely polarized. So while you're out there, feel free to have these conversations with people, have these dialogues of, where is this funding going to? What's your demographic like? How are you, yourself and your organization holding yourself accountable to make wildlife tourism and education more accessible? And I'm getting some really good comments in here of, I believe it's from Carla. Sorry if I have to call your name out. Of regarding education, I advocate for making the study of ecology a mandatory science class in high school. That could have a profound effect on future generations on their interaction with the natural world. So absolutely, Carla. I love how it's a mandatory thing, right? Because if it's an option, then, not a lot of people will sign up for it and say like, hey, it's an easy A, but having that kind of experience and kind of just that firsthand outreach and a foot in the door can, have such a profound impact, like you said, for future generations to actually take back control and do better than the past generation and our generation as well. And Shauna, I am located in Indianapolis and have a pending 501c3 nonprofit that's called the Big Bad Wolves. Our focus is working with our ambassador animals to educate the general public, state and federal agencies, and encouraging a coexistence with a non-lethal wildlife wolf management. Thank you for doing this conference. I can't wait to pick your brain after the conference. Awesome. Thank you so much, Shauna. Again, I will share out my contact information afterwards. But if there is anything else that people can think of on how to just be better stewards, and also just open up the gates and flood it while you're outside and doing some wolf watching and education. It sounds like there are some amazing educators in this call already doing that same work, whether it's in their classroom or in their nonprofit or their organization, of just making education more accessible so everyone, all communities can actually afford or have accessibilities to learn more about the wolves, and be a part of the land and be a part of the wildlife management as well, and not just a certain demographic, and not a certain individuals who are very affluent and can afford these outings. That would be awesome. But yes, my call to you is be the change. I would love everyone to be a big educator and advocate while they're out there and sharing this information as much as possible, because more information is better for these folks to actually go back to wherever they live, so they can keep in mind and keep updated and go back and, protect some wildlife and vote upon policies and legislations that truly do matter to make a difference, and support organizations that are front hand in doing the work themselves. I'm going to go ahead and leave my contact information to you all in the chat, but for the time being, I would like to just close out. And if you have any other questions, I'd love to take them.
Anna, we do have a couple of questions, if that's okay, if I can ask you some.
Yeah, go for it.
So to what extent do Yellowstone's wolves exit park boundaries from time to time? Knowing that you're a park educator, completely understandable if you don't know that statistic, or moving outside of Montana, Idaho, Wyoming. Just wondering if you have kind of a pulse on that.
Yeah, that is a great question, Rosie, and I'm glad you asked that. Because, for example, I live in Montana right now, but once I cross into the park, I'm also in Wyoming all of a sudden inside of the park. So I'm not sure the exact statistics, but I know like a few months ago, there was a wolf that crossed over to Montana and that was shot. That came from Yellowstone National Park. So I would love to look at the statistics, and I wonder if anyone else in this chat would know themselves as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Anna. Can you speak to some programs that might be doing some meaningful work in diversifying our national parks and accessibility? Have you had any interactions with those that might be housed in Yellowstone National Park?
Housed in Yellowstone National Park, I am still looking for it. I'm looking to it because I can't really say who I work for out of conflict of interest with my workplace. But I do have to say that there are incredible individuals out here in the national park doing the work themselves, whether they're, a woman of color, educator and biologist working with the Wolf Project with Yellowstone National Park, either they're, these park rangers. So I would say it's more of the individual and community members rather than like one giant organization, which it tends to be. And also I'd like to shout out your organization too, Rosie, of like you doing some of the work, if you want to, take the space to talk more about the organization you work for too.
You mean Defenders or Latino Outdoors? Yeah. Which one?
Honestly, a little bit of both, because I just had a Latinx hiker event last week with Bianca Modesta from Latino Outdoors. So if you want to talk about both, that'd be awesome too, just for folks to know.
Yeah, there's these wonderful programs all across the nation. I'll speak to the Latino Outdoors. There's Outdoor Asian and Outdoor Afro, and Latinx hikers as well, and Black Packers. There are a lot of different organizations that are trying to bridge the gap from BIPOC to the outdoors, and making sure that that all barriers are eliminated and the accessibility is there, while also being in community with people who look like you and speak the same language. And it's really empowering. And yeah, Anna, last week you took out Latinx hikers to take up that space in the outdoor community. And I thought that's so cool, because when I was younger, that was something that was never available to me. And so now that we're moving forward with it and seeing these big trips like to Yellowstone National Park, that's huge. And you being in partnership with those types of organizations is really, really wonderful work too.
Thank you, Rosie.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Like Allison did ask, given so many people can't go now, but wolves are being slaughtered now, how do you suggest we educate them? And that is a really awesome question, right? Just because the times are changing, and especially what happened last year with a lot of people staying at home, and this year too, of like, borders are still being closed off. A lot of people are still immunocompromised or don't feel comfortable traveling across the nation to go visit Yellowstone National Park. That is a truly great question of like, how, if they can't see it firsthand, how do we bring it to them instead? I would like to say that there are, social media platforms that are doing such a great job of, voicing concerns and advocating for the protections of wolves. I would say if you're at home and you don't have access to social media, if you're just the type of person who's like, I don't want to be on Instagram or Facebook, just staying up to current events of what's happening. So, and the more primary states of Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, and also Colorado now, it's like there are also a lot of current up-to-dates with, board meeting hearings, fish and wildlife commissioners that are meeting every few months, every couple of weeks, that are open to the public for you to actually attend via Zoom. A lot of these conferences and a lot of these meetings are now hybrid, where you can actually go in person or also log in from your computer and do what you're doing now, is actually just commenting and actually asking these questions too. So by, getting involved with that from an at-home basis, you can actually keep them accountable too, of like, here are some really hard-hitting questions. How are you, as the politician, the scientist, protecting some of the wildlife that we have here? I can speak upon Montana, and what's happening here is that with the federation that I'm the board member with, we are trying to overturn some of the, policies and legislations that were just passed that allowed wolf snare, or like snarings of wildlife, to allow baiting as well. Idaho just opened up to 90% of their wolf population to be slaughtered. And so some of those things, if you're truly angry about it, go ahead and text your friend and be like, hey, so-and-so, let's work on this together, right? Like, let's find an organization and volunteer however we can, whether it's posting on social media, attending virtual lobbying, attending virtual call outs, and actually, showing up for the wildlife, whether it's in a different state, or showing up for the environment too. But there are like multiple ways where you can actually start educating yourselves and others, just as simple as, sending out an email to maybe a listserv that you created with a lot of opportunities that are coming up on the calendar. But great question, Allison.
That was an awesome response, Anna, of how to get involved at home. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Another question, can you speak about the National Park Service system and the accountability of Indigenous genocide? What do you think first steps would look like for that in Yellowstone?
That is a great question, and I'm so glad you asked it, Rosie. One of, going back to the whole safe space with Latinx hikers last week, that was a huge portion of our conversation of like, what is land back look like? What is holding these federal agencies look like for land acknowledgement, and also the historical trauma and genocide of Native and Indigenous communities? Specifically with Yellowstone, it is a pretty special place, but it also comes with a dark history as well, because Yellowstone National Park is the first national park ever created in 1872. I live down the street from the very famous Roosevelt Arch, that overlooks the whole entire national park entrance. And in the front of it, that says, for the enjoyment and benefit of the people. So, that was a conversation opener of like, why is it the people and not all people, right? So where does that conversation come in? Who is belonging to this environment? And one of the things that I like to advocate for, and also folks at home too, is hold a lot of these federal agencies accountable, especially, for us to commercialize and market national park settings, and, having coexistence management with Native and Indigenous communities, kind of going back to the whole land back too. I know there are a few park rangers that I've met so far during my season here that are doing an incredible job educating the public, whether it's a different demographic that, are not necessarily open to learning about colonialization, who are, for me, I would have to tiptoe around the conversation, but a lot of these park rangers in there are saying like, this is what happened, right? They're, with the creations of the national park, specifically with Yellowstone, the military had to come in and also just push and remove a lot of Native and Indigenous people. And then for me, I'll talk about the bison management of like, why do you think we don't have 50 to 60 million anymore? It's because of the removal of Native and Indigenous people off their land. So I think the first step is actually the National Park Services to hold a lot of organizations, whether it's public or private, to actually talk about these issues while they're taking people out. So many times when I'm out there educating folks, a lot of individuals choose to stray away from the conversations because, it's a hard truth that a lot of people do not want to hear. But I think if you're not being uncomfortable, you're not learning. So I think like kind of having a baseline and a general agreement that when you're out there, kind of like a mandatory like land acknowledgement almost of like, you must acknowledge it because folks, if you still read books from the 1980 about the National Park Services, they'll say like, oh, one of the creations is, it's truly wilderness, it's truly wild, but those terminology means that there are no human contact within the land itself. So removing those words, we're kind of changing and using different verbs as well, such as reciprocity, and that there were people on this land to begin with. It wasn't truly wild or wilderness because there were indigenous and native communities that inhabited the land before the removal. And kind of those language uses can be a good start, as well as holding themselves and other organizations that commercialize the park accountable.
Another wonderful answer. Thank you, Anna. Speaking to you being an outdoor educator, can you make any recommendations for us that have been privileged enough to see wolves in the past? How do you recommend us make space for people who have not had that opportunity, and to remind ourselves like, hey, maybe make some room for people who have not done this before?
Yeah, it also comes down to, it sounds so silly, and for those of you at home, I'm so sorry. I am going to say this, just be friendly with one another. Having a friendly face out there, inviting people over, opening the like literal and hypothetical door and offering the chance for them to look into your binoculars, look into your scopes while you're out there, or even sharing the information when, you see a family with like a 3-year-old and a teenager looking for the wolves, and you're actually sharing the location of where the wolves can be. I know a lot of folks out here will tend to keep that location to themselves or keep the scopes to themselves and not share that information, where, I'm looking over and there's over 100 people in that one general area. And then there's this one family who's incredibly frustrated, who traveled thousands of miles to see the wolves, and no one's sharing this with them, right? It's really disheartening to have to send people all home after they traveled so far and woke up so early to really see these wolves. So one thing I would love to say is like, be inviting, be friendly to people. Don't be the gatekeeper. If you see someone who's like standing off to the side, invite them over and have a chat with them. That's like your opportunity to be the person that they remember on their trip, right? Because it only takes one person to truly make or break their experience. It only takes one person to shut them out and, take up that space for yourself and not share it with others, for people to go back home and be like, screw the wolves. Like, I don't really care about that anymore because I never got to see it. But, if you're able to share that opportunity with people, and you're able to take that 5 minutes or so, that short interactions, to educate them with what's happening, or the reintroduction, or, any little fun fact, they're going to go home and feel very empowered, inspired, and truly happy and honored that they met you out there, to be able to educate them and share that space with them. So just be friendly and open as much as possible, and be that person that's inviting and not closing the gates.
Thank you, Anna. Another question, do you have tips for wildlife watching in Yellowstone? Like any safety tips, just as a reminder, and more tips about, being more inviting?
Yeah, absolutely. So some tips, if you're coming to Yellowstone National Park and you really want to see wildlife, if you can afford it, book and look into some private organizations that are doing, private guiding as well, if you can afford it. If you can't, you just want to come with your friends and family, wake up as early as possible, find the group of cars that are surrounding in this one general area in Lamar Valley. And then also ask any individual that looks friendly, and ask them, hey, do you mind if I take a look in your scope? If they say no, move on to the next person. Don't take it too personally, because you are going to have, your Karens out there, but you're also going to have truly amazing people, as well as just individuals who do want to share that space with you. In terms of like wildlife watching, stay 100 yards away from, all wolves and grizzlies. when you're being approached. Another thing that I like to talk about is habituation, which is, a lot of times when folks are out there and they pay a couple $100s to $1,000 for a wildlife watching excursion, they always tell me, like, how come the wolves can't come closer to us? Or like, why can't we go out there and see the wolves closer? Usually with wildlife watching, it's about 2 miles away or so. And we want it to stay that way. Yellowstone is one of the truly amazing places where you actually go and see wolves interact in their natural habitat out in the open. A lot of times it's either in like the bushes in the forests of Alaska or even in the zoos itself. But with habituation, since, we have 5 million visitations this year alone. And like Rosie mentioned, it's like, if they cross that park boundary, it's a free for all for whatever happens to them, right? And borders are a social construct. So we don't want these wildlife, especially with the wolves and the bears, to become habituated or used to humans, because once they leave Yellowstone, we don't want them to come close to humans at all. And we want to be mindful of their space and us inviting ourselves into their habitat as well. And also, don't be afraid to yell at people and hold people accountable out there as well. I'm losing my voice every day because I'm now screaming at people to, not touch the bear, not approach bison, don't fall into the hot spring. And we'll probably get home like, this is all common sense, but for a lot of people, there's a lot of entitlement and privilege. So when you're out there, don't be afraid to just scream at them every once in a while and help me out.
That's a great reminder. Thank you so much. Living and working in Yellowstone about 2 years ago, I saw a lot of that. And so it's a nice reminder to keep wildlife at a safe distance.
Yes.
Yes. Awesome. Anna, I don't know if you have any other questions that came in from you on your side, but I think that we are getting just a couple more questions in. Just hold on one moment.
Okay. Right.
Okay. What has been the most rewarding experience about seeing wolves for you in Yellowstone?
So now, the first couple of weeks, I'm like, this is amazing. I'm seeing the wolf raising puppies. I'm seeing them interact with one another, getting to know the individuals themselves. And now I'm like seeing the puppies kind of grow up. But I think one of the most rewarding experiences is actually sharing people's first sighting with them. And I can't mention that enough. It's like, I've seen Wolf Faithful 22 times already this summer. I've seen the wolves almost every single day this summer, but like everything comes down to the people and the community members and like the younger kids and the older generation coming out. And there are multiple moments where my participants, my clients will turn to me with just like tears running down their eyes because they finally got to see the wolves. And a lot of people, it takes them, let's say, like 30 plus years, 70 years old, and they come out, they're like, this is my first time seeing wolves. Thank you so much. So for me, it's like more of the experience with the humans themselves, as well as like the wolves doing something cool in the back, but me being able to like set up the scope and show people, and they look in for the first time and they're like, oh my gosh, I get to see them. And they turn to me and then I'm crying now because they're crying, but nothing ever gets old as much as seeing people see the wolves for their first time and actually interacting and getting to learn.
And that's how we have the Speak for Wolves conference, right? Is that connection with wild places and wild spaces. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us, Anna. One last question. Can we ask you about the buffalo slaughter issue and Native peoples in the area? Can you kind of read the history behind that? When the buffalo were slaughtered, the native people of that land left as well.
Yes, that is a great history. So what Rosie is kind of referring to is kind of the bison history of, for those of you who don't know, Yellowstone National Park has the largest herd currently in North America with over 5,000 individuals. And you're probably thinking, holy cow or holy bison, that's a lot of bison or buffalo out there. But historically, before, let's see, European settlers or European colonizers came to North America, we used to have 50 to 60 million bison throughout North America. So if you ever, read back into some of the pioneer journals or some of the Native and Indigenous stories, you can they will have like these tales of, you know, bison roaming through the grassy plains, and it kind of hears like low rumbling thunder, because that's how many there were throughout North America. But when, you know, with the creation of national parks too, a lot of what the government entailed was actually putting out people like Buffalo Bill, for example, and other military people and other European settlers to go out and slaughter as many bison as possible. And I would love to hear in the chat of how many nooses you all think one individual bison has for an indigenous or native community. How many nooses? Give me a number. So Rosie, if you're getting those numbers, go ahead and let me know. I don't think I'm getting, all right, Rosie's saying 10, 17, 40, 3. Yeah, so all really great guesses. So it's about 70 uses for one particular bison alone. So, you know, when people are saying Native Indigenous communities use their entire animal, they really do mean it. And again, I want to acknowledge that I am not a Native or Indigenous, and I'm coming from it as an educator standpoint as well. But with that, you know, because Native Indigenous communities heavily rely on natural resources such as the bison, one of the methods of Native removals and removing people from their homelands was to actually remove the natural resources, right? And in your head, you're probably thinking that's going on in a lot of major cities, right? If you're thinking about any of the water resources or any of the food insecurity or food deserts that a lot of communities around our nations are already facing, that's one of the things that was prevalent back in the day, primarily with bison. So with removing that natural resources off the land, you're also forcing people off their land too to go look for natural resources elsewhere. I think the government alone slaughtered over millions of bison the first year, and also came out with a government assisted program, kind of like a food stamp, kind of like now you have to rely on government assistance and us for your survival, right? Because your natural resources are no longer around. If you're probably seen it before. If you haven't, go ahead and Google kind of the bison pictures back in the 1800s. You probably see all of these like old white men standing on top of a giant mound of bison skulls and bison bones too. There are some stories of people running off bison off the cliff and leaving them to die, shooting them point blank in the head. Buffalo Bill recounting that he killed over 1,000 bison just in one day too. So a lot of it just came primarily just from the slaughter and extermination of bison, to the point where there is only 25 remaining wild bison left. So those 20, from 50 to 60 million down to 25. They were relocated here to Yellowstone National Park, known as Lamar Valley, with an extensive, few decades long of quarantining and breeding program, hence why Yellowstone has the largest herd now. But with that, I'm going to tie it back to like a call to action. If you're wanting to do something about that and you're angry right now sitting at home, Montana is trying to relocate some of the bison in Yellowstone National Park back on Native reservation and Native lands to, you know, actually give independence to Native and Indigenous communities. So if you care, please keep up to date with that and try to raise your voice as much as possible and educate folks on that with, you know, giving back land and giving back resources to Native and Indigenous people.
Thank you so much. That was so great, just on the fly. You're a great educator, Anna. We appreciate you being here. Perfect. I think that is. Am I getting permits? I'm so sorry, there's a buried question in here.
No worries.
Okay, perfect. I think there's a question sheet that we look through. So just making sure that we are good to go. So I think that is it. Anna, thank you so much for being here. And we hope that you continue to stay on the conference, but thank you so much for letting us know about what's going on in Yellowstone, ways that you can be involved from your home. And thank you for sharing your stories with us. That was truly wonderful. And we're just so happy to have had you here.
Thank you, Rosie. And again, thank you for the Speak for the Wolves conference for having this space and allowing me to be in it and have this conversation with you all. Again, I did put my contact information in there if you want to reach out or follow along my journey with education, or donate to my education fund as well to get kids materials that they need while they're here. I would love your support as much as possible. Or if you have any questions, feel free to stay in contact with me. But thank you so much, Rosie, for inviting me today.